Okay, my name is Luke Peterschmidt. I've been in the tabletop game space about 20 years. I'm on the exec team at Wizards of the Coast. I designed Bakugan, if anyone knows what Bakugan is. Yay! I wrote I did all, not only the rules, I did all the non-traditional marketing for that product as well. So I have sort of three hats. I work for larger companies, helping them speak geek. I teach at Harrisburg University a class on critical game analysis, which is basically how to break a game down into its components and look at them all individually, giving a sort of a lexicon, a terminology to the kids so they know how to look at games. And then for fun, I have a small company called Fun to 11, and I make games with my friends on Kickstarter. And for shamelessly plugging, I have one on there right now called Epic PvP, which funded in an hour, and it's been up for 3 days. You should play it, it's really fun. And plug overdone.
Wow.
Yeah, jeez.
Wow.
Yeah.
Start a Kickstarter at the beginning of this.
Fire book and back.
Yeah.
Start Kickstarter at the beginning and then finish at the end. That's a good idea.
So before we actually get into like a bigger discussion, I've done this thing where I just want to set some ground terms. Because I think like knowing what we're talking about in this conversation is really important. And so I just kind of seriously went to dictionary.com and I pulled the definitions of some of these things because I want you to know, or I want you to see where we're framing and kind of work from there. So this is what dictionary.com says a review means. A review has a bunch of different definitions, like this judicial examination. This is the one we're probably looking at, which is the critical article or report, as in a periodical on a book, play, recital, or the like. I guess video games are the like. Critique or evaluation. Some gamers might like definition number 4, a general survey of something like a report or an account, just telling you what the thing is. But I think definition number 1 is probably the closest to what we consider like a game review. Notice, by the way, that includes the word critique in it. So what's a critique? An article or essay criticizing literary work is a detailed evaluation. Review. So a critique is a review and a review is a critique, which is really unhelpful. Notice that it also uses this word critical. And that's not great. This uses critical too. It says a critical article or report. And that word is really hard because I'm going to show you what that word technically means. Critical might mean intended to find fault or judge with severity. Like you're being critical of something. Or it might mean occupied or skilled in criticism involving skillful judgment as to truth, merit, etc., as in a critical analysis. I think what we want is that third definition, right? And when we say critical as a critique, we want that third definition. But it's really easy to confuse, because that word has this connotation of being negative and nitpicky, it's really easy to get confused. So when we say critical, I mean skillful judgment in this, as opposed to nitpicky criticism, the way that you think of like fault and hatred, right? It's not a negative thing. It's a I'm educated and I'm discussing this matter thing, which is different. Now there's another couple words that people have questions about. One of them is objective, which is to say not influenced by personal feelings or prejudice. And I think that that's a pretty people want their reviews to be objective sometimes. I hear a lot about that. We really want more objective game reviews. I love this objective opinion, which seems kind of like an oxymoron. Doesn't it feel like an oxymoron? I can't read. Is there even such a thing as an objective opinion? This is the opposite of this is subjective. And again, you're kind of running off the corners here, so I'm sorry about that. Yeah, subjective, which is existing in the mind or belonging to a thinking subject, which is the opposite of objective. So something that is a person's unique experience. But once again, if you look at that third definition, this is where I found a negative connotation, which is to say placing excessive and undue emphasis on your personal judgment. And number 1 and number 3 get tricky. Is somebody being excessively personal, or are they just being personal and they're giving their subjective opinion because this is the thing that they experienced? And I'm going to talk a little bit about some specific examples, just to kind of say, okay, those are the dictionary.com definitions. But what are our definitions like as gamers? Can you guys still hear me? I feel like I'm not leaning into the mic enough. Okay. What are our definitions like as gamers? So when you think of a game review, you probably think of something like this. And that's a GamePro review from like 1993. Just because I wanted to 1993 Mega Man. Remember when GamePro reviews had that little guy at the bottom?
I love that little guy.
That's a game review. That's part of a game review. They didn't they loved it, and they wrote, nah, I don't know. I can't tell what they gave it a really good score, but yeah. Babies, I don't know. I like Mega Man 5. Mega Man 5's alright.
It has passwords.
Yeah, it does. There's really good music.
4 beds though.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
I don't have that.
This is a more recent review. It's got scores, which I'll talk about. These are reviews that I snagged off of off the internet. So this is what we think of when we think of more of a critique. This your GameSpot critique. It's got words. Critiques have words. The one on the right is Carolyn Petit writing about Shadow of Mordor, and very critique from a feminist perspective on the game. So it's a little more academic, and it's a little more. It's kind of both senses of critical. It's critical of the game in the sense that she dislikes stuff in the game, and it's critical of the game in the sense that doing a critique on the game.
I'd actually like to point out, I'm as I look out at the crowd, there's a couple people, and I'm not, first of all, don't think I'm saying this is a bad thing, but there's a couple people who are like, and I think that's really important. I'm probably going to touch on some of that later.
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely, right? Some people are like, oh. By the way, Shadow of Mordor, my game of the year. I love the shit out of that game. Here's if you want to look at this, and if you want to take a moment to read some of the stuff, I'm just making it. I'm labeling this. You can disagree with me, but I think that this one's a little more subjective. Like, this isn't what I wanted to write, but I'm writing about this. It's more from her point of view. And the one on the left is a little bit more objective. You might do this if you are like this person. And this game it's a little bit more objective, right? Like, it feels a little bit more like it's a little distanced. And by the way, when I put this text on the left, Kevin Or text on the left, it's actually one of these reviews on this side. So it actually is a review. So you see the line between critique and review gets really blurred. But if you keep going down both of these articles, the same articles, we drift into Cloud Cuckoo Land where it's opposite. And, Carolyn is talking objectively about what's in Shadow of Mordor, and Kevin is talking subjectively about how he felt playing Elegy of a Dead World. So it goes both ways. Like, the ice cold Coors Light thing is like, this is my experience, I read this particular piece of text. So
Sometimes you have words to fill.
yeah.
Sometimes people don't know when to stop.
Yeah.
Stop with whatever your point was and move on.
So now that I've gotten through all those definitions, I want to talk about those things. Like, I want to talk about objective reviews, subjective reviews. Before we even get into this idea of review scores, because that's the next thing I want to talk about. But what do you think? Critique, review? Is there a line? Are they blurred?
So to me, and this is why I brought up people's reactions to certain types of language. And again, thank you for people who did that actually, because so I've had my hands in a lot of areas like this, where on one hand, I got into the game industry out of grad school when, I went to architecture grad school and did that, and then decided to go do 3D stuff in the game industry instead. So I'm writing, or as a side thing, I started writing with this game review site. And it was a really good exercise for me because when you're in a grad school environment, you start being all flowery and in your language, and let's see how many adjectives I can put in this sentence. And that's a thing. That's a certain type. I made very dense.
SAT, and damn it, I'm going to use those.
Yeah. People who are very erudite do that. But yeah, that's a thing, and if you read, DEGRA papers, it's a thing there too. So that, they're like, Chris, let's talk about your writing. you have to be in 500 words for this, so I had to start like hacking the language apart. But it taught me to be very concise with my thoughts. Not on panels, apparently. Apologize. But then at the same time, being a person who makes games, I also am a big proponent of like practical things. So I don't like to write about game design theory that can't be usable. I like to write about game design theory that is like, no, but you can use this in stuff. And I think that's where we lose a lot of readers, is that game design theory becomes this very in the clouds thing, and it's not a bad thing, but it also I think that's where the relationships with different audiences get murky, because game designers hate it and game fans are like, the fuck? So
when you say the word audience, then the first thing I think of when I look at the comparison slides there between Kevin and Carolyn's writing is what their venue is and what knowledge of that venue brings to things. So both of those people are a former GameSpot writer and then a current GameSpot writer. And Carolyn's thing was posted on a blog, which is a different type of forum where you go into it. Yeah. So you go into it and you say like, okay, it's on the Border House blog.
It's the content that you would expect from that blog.
Right, and you go to GameSpot and you expect a certain type of thing because they are in the business of doing product reviews, and so those framing mechanisms in particular are one way for us to understand the subjective and objective intentions of these writings.
Yeah, I think it's useful too to think about where game reviews we want them to fit in our larger industry. Like, do we want a game review to tell us, will we like this game? Right, objective, good for that. Right? Do we want a game review that will tell us what's this game's social impact on society? And we might be listening to a more subjective one, as long as we know what we're getting when we walk in. If I listen to one of your reviews at the end, I want to hear what your artistic impression is. How beautiful is it? How they do the art? Right? I want the expertise of the reviewer to come through in what they're good at. But as an industry, what we want, clearly, is people steered to games they will like. That's sort of like the simplest point for a review.
I was just wondering, what do you mean by like unusable game design theory?
Okay, so I actually I have a story about this, and I keep using this guy's thing as a story. And he was very nice, but but I was at this conference a number of years ago, and I listened to this talk on agency in games, and like taken to an extreme. So like, yes, games have agency. You can make decisions. It's great. But he was even talking about sort of the one-to-one controller agency. So in the speaker's opinion, like the Wii was great because, I'm playing Wii Golf. I'm golfing, But then if I'm playing Arkham Asylum and I hit A and then Batman like flips over a guy and then kicks the next guy, that's a disconnect. And so the argument was that, man, look at this other game that's kind of like The Ring, that your character picks up a Game Boy and plays the cursed game, but you're playing the cursed game because that's part of the game. So that's like the real thing, because you're playing a game and the character's playing a game. And I'm sitting there like, but I want to be Batman.
Yeah.
So like that, yeah.
The ivory tower gets ugly and lonely and pointless sometimes, but it is useful.
Yes.
Those conversations are hyper useful. They're just not.
Well, and I think
Sometimes you just want to be Batman.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
All the time.
all the time. But yeah, like, see, with that though, I think where I approach it personally, and again, this is a very subjective statement. I like to, take my fishing pole and like take that idea and like try to wrangle it down and see where we can like use it on the ground here. So, we were talking about architectural phenomenology beforehand. More GE.
Like you do.
Like you do, that's more better. And it was like, okay, long story short, for people who don't know what that is, it's based on, like, if we were all looking at this room, some people would argue that you should judge the room for its own merits and not based on your opinion of other rooms you've seen before. Yeah. So I talk about that in my book, but I'm like, yeah, but who cares? So let's talk about phenomenology and player personalities, and thus how to design a multiplayer map for a sniper, a person who likes to camp, a person who likes to go and run and shoot people in the face, maybe even a troll every once in a while. Please don't. That kind of stuff.
And that's useful functional critique, which is a whole other thing, like very down on the individual nitpicky critique. We'll take one more and then I have more stuff to show.
Yeah.
How could big websites do a better job to, I guess, educate their audience about what kinds of reviews they I asked because you use Carolyn, a snippet of Carolyn's, who I do a lot.
Yeah.
And she kind of got famous or infamous because of her GTA review last year.
Yeah,
That kind of put her in-
here is the number one problem facing reviews today, I think. You're on your Facebook tweet, your Facebook or whatever, and you see two posts. One says, this reviewer you've never heard of thinks, pick a game, Castlevania, is a pretty bad game. And you see another one that says, reviewer you've never heard of, Castlevania is the worst game ever. Which one do you click on? Right? You click on the people that use the big, hard words.
Mm-hmm.
Best game ever, worst game ever.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden we're not talking about, hey, if you like this kind of game, you like it. It's best game, worst game. And that gets the attention. So there's a real push-pull between people who want to be more objective or more clear on where they're coming from, and people who want clicks.
So I think this is actually a really good segue into discussing scores.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about review scores.
Great question.
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a couple different types of review scores, and I think review scores are really interesting. So here's what Kotaku does now. They do a thumbs up, thumbs down kind of thing. Or they do a yes, no, maybe, where it's like, don't buy it now, buy it later. This is their revised Destiny review. So it's like, hey, yeah, I'll go ahead and play Destiny, we like it now, thumbs up. This is what Tap repeatedly does. We have this really subtle thumbs up, thumbs down, where we just stick a little symbol at the end. And like, on the left is good stuff, that happy, sad face is like, yeah, it was all right. And then we have all these things for bad, just, I don't know, for funsies.
Are they all equal?
No, actually, chunks of poop is the worst that a game can possibly be.
Worse than roadkill and sneaky.
Worse than
Worse than
roadkill.
roadkill.
I have never rated a game chunks of poop. I don't have to, I've never played a game that I thought was that bad. Or I've never wanted to write about a game that I thought was that bad.
You'll get way more clicks.
Right, that's
Yeah.
true, that's true. I would just dig out a game
The
that
worst
was
game
the worst game ever. Or just take a game that's actually really good and just say that. Just say,
Way
no,
more
I would
clicks.
never actually do that. I would never. I'm very honest about my opinion of games. This is what like Polygon and GameSpot does. They do this little, GameSpot and Polygon look really similar now. They do this little like, hey, 9.0, 7.0, they do this one number thing. It's usually from 1 to 10, kind of, but actually it's like from 7 to 10. Right? Like,
Which is the opposite of Board Game Geek, where it is.
No.
Yeah.
Polygon actually does use their entire scale, which you don't see a lot. Most sites are like, and then you get this, this like, there's that Mega Man 5 again, because I was like, this is how we used to do it back in the 90s. But also, like, this is a newer site here that sifted.net, and they do this really breakdown kind of thing, where it's like, story 3, connectivity 6, graphics 7, average the numbers together, which feels very scientific, kinda. And then, or you can have this sort of like, this like, these are all the different things that go into this review, and then here's the number that we gave it, which is similar to the previous, but it still is kind of broken down. As teachers, and many of us, all of us on the stage have taught our teachers, we do this a lot with what we call a grading rubric. Where like, hey, your first PowerPoint slide was worth 5 points, and your second PowerPoint slide was worth 5 points, and then your knowledge was worth 40 points. It's just what I randomly pulled off the internet. But how many of you have seen one of these for a project or assignment that you had to do? It feels very objective, which, there's that word objective, right? If you do X and Y, then boom, you get an A because you got these points. It's convenient for us because it lets you know what you need to do, and it cuts down on like nitpicking and arguing over points and stuff. On the other hand, this game's concept is good, but how is its playability? It feels a little fuzzy all the same. Like it's just breaking it down into more fuzzy categories of fuzziness. I feel like it's a terrible way to evaluate art.
Yeah.
And since you grade art, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel that way?
So this is actually a problem with game art, and I'm doing a panel on game art like right after this, So, yay! People are gonna show up.
He'll be there.
Yeah. Yes. It's game art is in a state where it's sort of just like the most scientific thing, or it's treated very scientifically, but it's not treated like the picture on the left.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Art.
So as an artist, I will go and start talking about like, well, the anatomy of your 3D character sucks. You know, and
Well,
here's
what's my poly count though? Did I hit the
Exactly,
target poly count?
exactly.
It's got numbers, and then you can grade me on that.
but like I know I UV'd it really well.
What's the resolution of that
It's like,
game?
but you
How many
got a
graphics
Rob
does it have?
Liefeld, you know, chest shelf going on, and like tiny little feet. So fix it.
Yeah, so just for funsies, I'm gonna take the counter position here. I like those breakdowns.
Yeah.
I just think we're not very good at them yet.
Yes.
So there are, what that breakdown should tell you, again, I'm gonna go back to hammering the same point home, is I wish it summarized was, if you like game X, you'll like game Y.
Yeah.
If you like that, you will like this. Give people some context to
Yeah.
use those numbers, because some people really don't care about visuals. A lot of pixel art fans. A lot of pixel art fans. Minecraft, a huge hit, but if you averaged out Minecraft on that list, it would look like a total failure. So it's the average that bugs me so much, not as much as the breakout.
So I have a question for you guys, but let's get to the discuss portion, and then I have a question for the rest of the panel.
I also want to say too that Joystick, just as I was putting these slides together, said we're not scoring reviews anymore, and here's why. And they have a bunch of different reasons. Read this article and see what their rationale is. But here's what they said: between pre-release reviews, post-release patching, online connectivity, server stability, and myriad other unforeseeable possibilities in catching a concrete score to a new game isn't practical or helpful to our readers. And they also say that Metacritic is a problem, which I'm sure that a lot of you have noticed that sometimes developers' money is tied to their Metacritic score, which is like, game journalists maybe shouldn't have that much power over who gets what royalties, right? Like that's a little bit of a weird thing. So, and they had a 5-star system, and Metacritic would often convert that to a really low score, just because of the way that they used all 5 of those stars, which ended up screwing over developers in a way they never meant to do. So they're like, we're not scoring anymore, we're done. I see a lot of hands up. You've had your hand up in the back for a while, so yeah.
You know, speaking about game critiques or reviews, since, you know, a lot of people, including myself, like to opinion game reviews and stuff like that. You know, personally, I don't see a problem with Metacritic because I think sometimes I do sense the feeling that, you know, sometimes a lot of the professional game reviews are a little too hype on one game to a point it's like, really? It's like you wonder, like, did someone take a backdoor deal or something like that?
Yeah.
You see the ad in the website or something like that? So I'm not really upset at that, but my question is this, is if what I say is like true or something, when the game is like really hype on someone's website, and you're like IGN or Escapist or game trailers, like you see none of my ads, like for example, Dragon Age 2, which a lot of people, fans did not like that game. But yet, you look at all the reviews from the big game websites, they gave it like 8, 9, 10. Some people said it was better. And what at the end of the day, who should people trust when you have the fans like play it and it was completely like it felt like it was betrayal.
Yeah.
But
So how does a review get to be so good by
Yeah.
professionals and then hit the street and be so not good? I like the reason that they don't want to review things with scores, because digital games have digital components that aren't fully featured. But I'll leave that stuff.
So I was going to say, first of all, The Escapist, during some unpleasantness this fall, though we're not going to go into too much discussion. Really. They had a thing where they're like, this is our updated set of rules by which this website will work. And they said there are ads, they will continue to exist, they are a source of revenue, but they are only, we are saying this in writing, they are only there because the marketing people put them there, and the editorial staff have nothing to do with the writing people. So we may find ourselves reviewing a game poorly that is the sponsor for the site. So look for stuff like that when you, who do you trust? But I think with reviews, I think to me, we need to start asking ourselves, what are the function of each of these things? Because I like reviews. Because if I'm going to look at like, oh, there's a game I want to get, but do I want to spend the money? I could spend it, on something else. Let me go online. Let me look at the consensus of reviews. And so to me, they're kind of as a consumer, they serve a utilitarian function. But I think we need to, I don't know, my thing is, how do we make that the understood aspect of them? Because then you get into then people start treating them as a critique. And again, let's answer some of these fine people's questions, and then that'll go again into my question I have for you guys.
How do you feel about the language that's being developed for game reviews, like impacting,
Sure.
like or more the lack of
Yeah.
a common language for games is
Very, very frustrating. So the question was about the language that's being developed for games for reviews. This is what my entire class is basically teaching people language so that they can review them consistently. Like if I tell you, it's kind of a Van Neumann game, you're going to be like, what? All my class kids will know what that means. And someday you will know what that means.
Yeah.
But that's the language the game designers use. And we need to get that out there. That's the game designer's fault. We haven't explained what some of these issues are. And there are certain features that are considered problems to some game designers and features to others.
Yeah.
There are lots of elements that swing. If I tell you this game has a really big catch-up issue, you might go, oh, that's fine, I don't care. Or a big king-making issue, I don't care, I love those games. They're super fun with my friends. But we don't do that. We say, oh, this game's multiplayer isn't good. That's a terrible review.
And that's the practical, like, game designers use these terms to describe how their game is designed, and it doesn't often filter into reviews because the designers haven't shared that language and way of communicating with reviewers. On the other side, critics have developed an entirely different, their own language, which sometimes sounds a little highfalutin. They use words like ludonarrative dissonance, which seems like...
Can you bifurcate that word from?
right. Well, ludo...
never mind.
right.
Well,
Yeah, right.
and ludonarrative dissonance is
Yeah.
like, it's the word that you use to sound smart when talking about games, but now in like, if you put that in your paper, they're like, oh, he's still talking about ludonarrative dissonance.
Right. Oh, that's so...
I don't know what that means, and
2005.
I've made games for 20 years.
Well, yeah, so, right, so there's this kind of critical language that you see in the pure critical papers, and then there's this stuff that you see like in the pure design papers, and sometimes those things aren't talking to each other, so then you develop like two separate game languages.
I actually am a strong believer in the idea that every person who's writing academic stuff about, well, most people who are writing academic stuff about games, but like about game design, because there's somebody like Kent Norman, who's a big person that comes to this conference every year. He studies like effects of games and psychology. That's something else. But anybody who talks about game design or reviews games, I really feel they should they should have some experience making a game. Crack open Game Maker and screw around with it. And get to the point where you're like, I made clouds move, everybody on Facebook, I made clouds move, and you're proud of it. So then you don't get those like, I don't see why Nintendo just doesn't have like controller support for like these 27 games with the GameCube adapter. Because like, they can just flip a switch and do that, right? It's like, no. Budget's a thing, effort's a thing, human resources are a thing, time's a thing. That sort of like knowing what goes into the thing is important, and I think that would cut down a lot of that like entitled consumer language in reviews.
I think as a counterpoint to that, there is something also about the position that you take as someone who doesn't have that knowledge that is related to the position of your audience that also doesn't have that knowledge. And if you think your job is to educate people on why something that is should be or seems to be possible is not possible technologically, that's one thing. But if you are speaking from a position where all you are interested in is the experience of the consumption of the thing, then what you're writing is more relatable to the audience who also has a similar position to that. So you're directed in the way of your reader as opposed to the way of the designer who's looking at your review.
Yeah. All right.
We don't have professional reviewers, let's be really clear. Most people that review games get paid very, very little.
Yes.
Right. So we don't, I like motorcycles, and there's a couple of sites for motorcycles that are like the go-to sites. They treat those reviewers like gold. They fly into Sicily, they ride the bikes, it's beautiful, it's sunny, wonderful. And then they come home and go, that bike sucked. And they get invited back again.
Yeah.
Because they're so trusted. We don't have critical people that are trusted yet. We have objective, no, we don't have objective people trusted at that level.
Yeah.
Top 10 best known game reviewers, I think they're all on the highly opinionated side, not on the objective, will you like this side.
Yeah.
We're just too scattered of an industry right now. We don't have an industry leader.
Well,
And
and-
too many people trying to get in.
Yeah, well, and you can be a game, anybody in this room can be a game reviewer.
Right,
There-
they're all
there's no entry level to it, and like a lot of people do get that. You know, the reason that the site that I used to write for is not around anymore is because the guy who was the editor, after 5 years as the editor, got a job at GameSpot. So, but you know what he did to get into that? He said, I'm a game reviewer. Boom. You know, and so it's not like you can go to study to be a game reviewer.
You can at my school.
Yeah. So but that's the thing. Like that should be a thing because then we might start getting better game reviews.
All the way in the back. What?
Yeah.
All right, so with the, one of the trusted objective reviewers, that actually ties into the issue, 2007 Cambridge review, with your getting fired.
Oh,
Yeah.
There's a question kind of moving over game reviews of what is the ethical status of game reviewers as a whole? The journalism industry for games is kind of shaking at the ground. You've got Jeff Niley with Doritos Gate, you've got the Duke Nukem Forever release, and the 2K's PR team threatening to cut off reviewers from any future 2K releases.
Yeah.
How do we, as potential reviewers or as consumers, really gauge whether or not these people are going to be ethically worthwhile?
I feel bad for consumers. I don't think
Yeah.
you have a safe harbor in this storm until we start having really industry-leading websites who can pay their staff professional wages to be better.
Okay, here's the thing. Who of you are in college or in a position where you can take like, you know, you can take a game studies course or, you know, can like go back to your school and sit in on one? Show of hands. Demand game studies courses. That's what?
School doesn't offer it. Are there online resources?
Well, that's the thing. I would,
They will soon.
there will soon, yeah.
Yeah.
So there are online resources, there are websites you can go to, there are different, and you know, fire them off. You can go to like the Digital Games Research Association, DGRA, and like go read their digital library, and those are all really cool game studies sources. There are great books on game studies and game design that you should read, and you'll build your
For total
language.
beginners, I have like Pixel Prospector.
Yeah.
It's like how do you start making a game?
Yeah.
Yeah, just-
Read A Theory of Fun for Game Design. It's a short read.
I'm going to show another one too in a minute. The Book of Lenses, that's a really good one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Book of Lenses is great.
There's
Rules
a lot
of
books.
Rules of Play. Yeah, it's a big one.
Richard Garfield's book is probably and SCAF, it's probably the standard in terminology, if that's what.
Yeah.
We, I think it was last year, and Kevin, maybe you can remind me, it was last year that we did the thing about books, suggestion of books, the library, was that MAGFest 8.5? So, you know, at MAGFest 8.5, we actually did a talk on like, all right, you're interested in getting, or you want to get started in this, what are some books you look at? And I'm going to see if I can pull up that reading list still, which we posted online at some point.
Yeah.
That'd be like great shorthand.
You've had your hand up for a while, and now there's another slide. Go ahead.
I'm just wondering if you guys think that scores actually have any value without that context, because I feel like there is no true like perfect game on the scale of like 1 to 10, and I feel like 1.6 for one game doesn't necessarily equate to a 6 for another game, because yeah.
Well, and I think that goes into the notion of like that subjectivity. Like, you know, IGN gave Super Mario Galaxy 2 a 10, and I love it, but I am a Mario fanboy. So somebody who's not like as into Mario might be like, well, I mean, it looks good.
I think the trick is to know the reviewer, not just the site.
Yeah.
And that goes back to this idea of having a trusted reviewer. Like when people read what I write, I stick a little symbol on the end. But they know who I am and what kind of stuff I like versus what kind of stuff I don't like. And then we can kind of try to develop, rapport, like, listen, you might be into this, it's not for me. And here's the reasons it's not for me, but I don't know, and I think that if you can really figure out who the people are, and don't just go by the site, because IGN is not a person.
Yeah.
A person gave that score.
Yeah. Well, it's like, okay, when Ghostbusters.
The one thing I think, one of the people I really like is music, which is overuse of 10 out of 10 of almost every game.
Yeah, a 10 just means top 10%. So
Yeah.
let's not think a 10 means perfect.
Yeah. So
In a scale from 70% to 100%.
So actually here's that question I was going to talk about. So you guys all teach game studies and game design. If you write papers, what do they look like? Or if your students write papers, what are they writing?
So I'll start with this one because the class I created this semester is based around this question. And so I'm having them write 3 types of papers. The first thing with effectively, very little knowledge of what we're teaching in the course that they did in the first week was do a game review. And we read an article that had been published, or a paper that had been published about what game reviews look like by Jose Segal. And he calls them a prominent discourse. And I said, here's a prominent discourse that we discussed. And I want you to go look at, read this paper, think about reviews you may have read. If you're unfamiliar with games, go look at some, and just write a review. I don't know what it looks like, I don't care, whatever you want to put in. And I'm interested to see what they're writing about. But then I'm also having them do like a design analysis and a critique. And so I'm trying to share along the way that we have very different modes of writing. And eventually, you could make them one thing, but I've purposely structured my assignments to think about it in different ways.
I go way,
I'll pass on this one, so.
I go way more atomic. I say, here are 10 terms that I've defined in the last 5 classes.
Yeah.
Look at any game that you like that is maybe multiplayer and something, and show me where it fits on those 10 scales.
Yeah.
So what is the asymmetry of the setup? What is all those types of things.
So I also go atomic. On one hand, when you're pitching the come learn about games class to an undergrad, especially if it's a general education course, there's an element of being kind of vague with the description, such that you're going to learn about games, so you do get people to come. But then, day one, I'll be like, so we're going to write about games in terms of these things, and I'll give them a couple of examples.
Which is a good segue to.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, wait, more fun.
We do.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I really wanted to talk about this idea of games as a text.
Yeah.
And when I say as a text, I mean as a literary text, the same way that a film or literature, this is a text-based game, so that's kind of fun. But I also love text-based games, so don't grab away from that. But I think there's still some debate whether or not, this is hilarious. There's still some debate. I feel like this is solved. I think games are art. But there's still some debate about whether or not that's true. On the other hand, I'll show you the game later. This is a real game. There's some debate as to whether or not it's pretty universally understood that they are at least a text, right? That a game is just like a film or some kind of literary text. A game is a text.
Yeah.
And because of that, a game can be critiqued as a text through what you call a critical lens. And I apologize for the Comic Sans. This is a direct cut and paste from a website. Which is down here at the bottom. So this is not my writing. This is down at the bottom. So there's all these different lenses that we can view a game through, which are critical lenses. And I think the one that people are really familiar with is the feminist gender lens. That's been very popular lately. But also other, like the narratology lens, for example, viewing the narrative archetypes in a story, regardless, and looking at a game as a hero's journey, the way that I often use Legend of Zelda as an example of a hero's journey, or the deconstruction or post-deconstructionalism, where some games are very deconstructionalist, something like the Stanley Parable is kind of deconstructionalist, and how do you view like a deconstructionalist, post-structuralist kind of game? Those are all things that we can do when we look at a game. Does this game have elements of political criticism like Papers, Please, and those are more critical lenses. When I talk about Papers, Please and how it shows a fascist state, I'm not talking about whether or not you should buy Papers, Please. That's a totally different thing completely.
Yeah.
And I was bringing along this idea of there's this book called Book of Lenses, and I worked for Jesse Schell, so I'm a big fan. And he did this thing called this book called The Art of Game Design, where he looked at games through game lenses and has a big stack, a whole card deck full of different lenses you can apply to critically evaluating a game.
Which is also an app too, so.
And it's an app, yeah, download it.
So people who are saying, hey, what are some of the resources? You can download this like right now on your smartphone.
And it asks questions like, that are directly applicable to a game designer, such as, what does my game judge about the players? Do players feel the judgment is fair? Or it asks questions that are a little fuzzier, like, does my game help people and how? But some of this is very down to earth, some of it's a little more high-minded. It's all over. So you see the little symbols up there, like that's on the card, tells you like on what level is this lens being applied.
Yeah, and the shorter version for the term lens would just be bias.
Right.
We all have bias. That term sounds terrible, but it's not. It just means whatever you brought to the table before you started playing.
Yeah.
Your life experiences, all of that. So number one thing for reviewers, and few do this, is they take time to understand their own bias.
Yeah.
And that's totally okay. I'm totally biased towards certain types of games. But that means if someone puts a different type of game in front of me, I need to be able to review it and say, not for me, but awesome.
Now some people say that's kind of dumb, like games are software, and they need to be reviewed like software. Does it work? Is it buggy? That's certainly an aspect, right?
It does not work.
Right.
None of it
Doesn't
works.
work anymore.
It's all broken.
It's all broken. On the other hand, you can look at reviews as an examination of culture, the way we do film. So Luke said to put in a slide about Selma, because Selma is a movie about Martin Luther King Jr. And when you look at the reviews, it's not just about the film, it's also about the cultural impact of this film. One of the most powerful examples of sacrifice, what we'll see in this century, when she's talking about that, she's talking about what happens in the movie, not just the movie. And like, where do we draw that line? And also, putting aside all of that, this is totally my personal bugbear. As Luke mentioned too, reviewers don't get paid that much. And if you want to be a full-time video game critique writer, you have a really hard road to hoe. So a lot of people go to Patreon, they go to alternative funding sources, because they want to write this more high-minded, more academic critique, but they don't know, there's nobody hiring somebody to do that. And that's a challenge for people that aren't like in academics and have academics as their output. The academics is like a good way to actually get these articles out there.
Yeah.
If you don't have that, like a university backing you, it becomes a word of film.
Yeah.
So
and the space is also so new that if you have a really good objective reviewer, he'll probably get hired somewhere, or she'll get hired to make games somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's also true. Get snapped up, and I now work for Microsoft, right?
Yeah.
So,
it's like a resume. My reviews are a resume.
No, it's
They are.
true. Like when I did my interview, he's like, "Hey, I read one of your reviews and the discussion that came up around that, and like that was like the fundamental thing we talked about."
Yeah.
So like the fact that I can have those conversations is important to developers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead, right now, let's talk.
So you put a lot of emphasis on objective reviews. What do you make of seemingly insurmountable barriers for game reviewers, where the company making the game, say Activision, gives you a copy of their newest game before it releases, because people want to read reviews before the game releases, and they say, review this game well, or you're not getting any more games from us, and we're going to shun you from the core, like all of our games, and like we're going to publicly shame you, or like destroy you as a company.
Well, I'd say think about yourself when you're 70 years old and ask yourself how you wish you responded. Right? You're going to want to say, I responded in the way that I feel good about later. But you have one opinion, you have one you. If you're writing under a fake name and you want to make a fake name that says great things about everyone else, you're not going to feel great about it in a second. Like, be legit and tell people that's what Activision told you. Say, hey, I'm reading this game. I think it's great. Even though Activision threatened me, I still think it's a great game. And if you don't like it, say they threatened me. I'm never going to see an Activision game again, but I just can't make myself do this.
Yeah, think about who you're more afraid of. Are you afraid of the publisher, or are you afraid of your audience turning on you and losing all credibility if you did something that seemed untoward?
Or your own internal.
Well, I mean, that's one thing. I care about what other people think about that.
So there's a book out there that you all should read by I can't remember the name of it. It's like Shark something or. But it's written by one of the writers from Polygon, and it's about his experience with game reviews, and it's about people who work at like a fictional but like bigger than IGN review site, and there's this like whole thing with a relationship between a big game company and the review, and finally she decides, like, she's playing this game, she's like, there's something wrong with it, and then she realizes that it's a remake of a game that she played 30 years ago, and it was sold as like completely original content, and she outs that in a review, and the industry explodes.
So I think I just solved this problem thanks to this panel. This is what we need. We need 3 good reviewers to go to Consumer Reports
Yeah.
and say, we want to be the Consumer Reports video game review site, because Consumer Reports pays for all their own games. They don't wait for someone to send them a free game.
Yeah.
And they're infinitely trusted.
Yeah.
And they have a revenue model. Pay for our magazine.
What if there was a third party into that? Like, we were discussing the game reviewer themselves and then the company. What if you have like an IGN says, they give the game to IGN, and IGN tells you, like, this is like IGN's the biggest job you've ever had with reviewing games, and they're like, write a good review for this game, or else we won't publish it, and then we'll just not hire anymore, or hire you anymore.
Here's your ticket to fame. Take that letter from IGN, post on your Facebook site, smash the game if it's terrible, and you will have 1 million Twitter followers.
Yeah, and you'll get hired. Somebody will hire you.
Oh, yeah.
Well, because, I mean, so I was listening to the radio a couple months ago, and I was, yeah, I know. And they were talking about this, this author was reviewing a book about her friend, that's a biography of her friend, and she didn't be like, the word count was good, the pages were a good shade of white, the ink was nice. She talked about like what it was like having meals with her friend, and she talked about the food they would cook and all this other stuff, and I'm sitting there like driving, and I'm like, wow, we have a better language to talk about food than we do games. And I think, what you're talking about is this system that sort of turns into it perpetuates the GamePro model, where, rate us on these things, and then that becomes the language by which you guys are exposed to, as consumers, exposed to game criticism, and then, when I ask...
some games you can't evaluate well on that particular scale.
Yeah.
Like the review that I showed you was for LG of a Dead World. That's a really non-traditional game. It's you creative right, and it's all about your input into the game. It's not, I don't know how you'd stick a gameplay score. Because if you play, anybody played LG for a Dead World? Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's, how do you stick a gameplay score on that?
It would be like trying to score one of my creative writing classes.
Right,
Yeah.
it's a creative writing project,
Yeah.
essentially, that gets handed to you in game form. Totally different, totally wacky. I don't know how you, and I wrote about the game, and I didn't stick a number on it because I was like, this is interesting. If you want, I'm going to tell you what this is, and it's up to you whether you want to play it or not.
Well, and that's where we get all those like, well, this isn't a game. This isn't a game. And that's like all some people can say about it, because you can't rate it on those criteria.
On the gameplay scale, yeah.
Yeah, well, and because I'm thinking about like, and this is an old example by now, but my favorite example, Dysphoria. It's like, how do you rate Dysphoria in GamePro? You can't. And
We need to do 1 to 10. Is this like something I've seen before?
yeah.
You have a question, what's up?
You mentioned earlier.
Oh, no, right here in front, then I'll get you to that. Yeah, okay.
The onus is on who then to start this? Like, it can't necessarily be on us, especially someone like me who I hope I can pitch an editor, and if they give me $50 to $100 to write whatever they think I'm good at, then yes, I'll do that. But the academics, the people who teach classes on it, who develop the games, who think academically all the time, is it up to them to get together and start this from the top?
I would love if you read our website, and also the Journal of Game Criticism is really cool.
Yeah.
I'm now on the board for that. That's a cool one. It's a little more academic. It's a little more high-minded. It's not consumer-ish at all. It's totally different. So it depends on really what you're looking for.
Well, really, I would say academics, have classes. Students either take the classes or go to your university. And I mean, here's the thing. If you can convince your school's provost that you want game classes, and some schools actually, departments will get money based on how many classes people take their classes. Just start being like, take a petition, and if they get a signature with a couple thousand names, or a couple hundred, like a significant number of students that say, we want to take game studies, you know, you'll have departments being like, we want to do games, because they're kind of hot right now, you know, like, departments get money for game studies.
The real nuts and bolts though is if somebody comes to you and says, review this game for $50, review the game for $50, right?
Yeah.
If someone comes to you and says, review this game for $50, and if you don't give a good review, you're never going to get $50 from us again, then you have to make a personal decision about where you want to live in this ecosystem. And there's nobody in this room who has the responsibility of industry on them. Like, we live in this industry, and it's a mix of ivory tower academics and people that make games, people that review games. So my hope is that somebody who wants to, as a profit motive, create a website that makes it possible for someone to make real money being the honest reviewers. And we haven't had that yet. We're getting there. I think we'll get there.
One of the great opportunities, just really quickly, one of the great opportunities that exist right now is that through use of social networking and ways of connecting with other individuals, is that there are a lot of people who are interested in doing something that's not just game reviewing, but games criticism, and you know, they post on things like the Border House blog and Critical Distance, and you can get involved in that community just by speaking with people using Twitter or Facebook or whatever it is, and you're not getting paid to do that work necessarily, but it is a great time to start doing that type of writing.
And if you're going to have a point of view, like, really follow through with it. I think one thing that I've seen that I think is very sad is when you have a website and they start out and they're like, yeah, we're going to write about all kinds of things. We're going to review games, but we're also going to have this academic thing. We want people to learn about game design. And then they start getting addicted to all the page views they get when they write a Call of Duty article.
Oh, kill screen.
Yeah. But, I mean, at the same time, you do have something like Kill Screen that at least does talk about, like, artistic elements of games. And they really, I mean, I will say this in Kill Screen's defense, they still have those articles. I've seen websites completely 180 and just be like, the top 10 reasons I like Skyrim. And, you know.
And those were reasonable business decisions. I would never fault those people for changing their website to make that money.
They are reasonable business issues.
To respond to the market pressure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think what you need are things that, what it comes down to is expand the avenues in which you can get game news. To me, part of the problem is that we're talking about very big machines, a few very big machines, like IGN, GameSpot, et cetera, et cetera. Those are big machines, and we know all of them, and you know, we can name them on we can count them on one hand. You know, why don't local newspapers have, I mean, well, local newspapers are dying, but why don't, like, local resource sites, you know, where, you know, maybe there is a local film critic or local something, see if they have, you know, want somebody to review games.
We had another question in the back, somebody that spoke out earlier. Yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned earlier where certain reviewers are biased for certain genres or certain just franchises. How do you reconcile reviewing incredibly niche genres or certain game types that may only appeal to a small percentage of people, including none of the reviewers on staff? The case I can think of is going on to any one of the major news sites and trying to read a bullet hell review with that complaints where it's too short. Or, you know.
Yeah, I totally get the question. The question is, how do you trust a website if the reviewers are all have biased favorites, but none of the people's bias makes them like the game that you are? This is where...
Not even like the game...
Not the genre.
Being able to properly contextualize it within the genre.
Yeah, this is where when you break down things to an atomic level, and you can talk about undeniable truths. Mm-hmm. Bullet Time is a game that only takes 7 minutes to play. Right? That is just a fact, right? Yeah. So calling it too short or too long, a good reviewer should know this is a genre that is so different that I can't say that's good or bad. This is where the scores are terrible.
Yeah.
Because the length of play of some of the best games I've ever played is under 5 minutes.
So this is actually where, you know, this is where there are opportunities for the people that are just going to like start writing about games on the side in a blog in a certain way. So imagine you are a guy that is really, or maybe you are. Imagine, are you passionate about bullet hells, for example? Do you like them? Like, okay. Okay, so like let's say you love bullet hells, like that was your favorite game, right? So you could write a blog about bullet hell shooters. And So then IGN reviews a bullet hell and says it's too short. Well, somebody who is also a fan of bullet hells might be like, well, that sucks. You know, that's not a valve that I can use. Then they go Google bullet hell review, and then they find your blog, and then suddenly they're like, this guy, this is my kind of guy. I'm reading that guy.
Yeah, be that person.
Yeah, be that person. Because like, so a couple years ago when Ghostbusters, the video game came out, loved that game.
Oh, yeah.
And I had only the Wii at the time, so and I bought it on the Wii, and it was the best thing ever. I could, fulfill my 4-year-old fantasy of like shoot the ghost, throw the trap. It was great. It was reviewed on IGN by a guy who only until then wrote for the PlayStation 3 blog or the PlayStation 3 site. He's also a big fan of Ghostbusters, so he reviewed it on all platforms. And his review of the Wii version was, "It's not a PlayStation 3 game," basically. And I'm like,
It's objective.
yeah, exactly. Like, so I'm there with you. It's like I don't read his reviews. I was like, well, that review's dumb. I'm gonna go buy it, and I loved it. So, it's.
I imagine movies are the same issue. How do
Yeah.
you review the crazy art piece movie when you're, on the big paper?
When a crazy art piece reviewer reviews the Avengers, it's like, oh.
Yeah.
We're probably out of time, so I'm gonna see if they're gonna kick us out. What, we have time? One more question? Okay, who's had their hand up the longest?
Who hasn't had?
Who has a head, you got to ask
That
questions.
guy has it, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, a lot of other industries have like peer-reviewed certification boards or things like that. Is there any reason that wouldn't be viable in this industry?
We will have it in a few years. We'll have a degree that you can get that throws some letters at the end of your name when someone makes that up. Because that stuff's just made up. Like, you can get a certificate in gamification now because someone said you can get one by paying. So it will happen. Just like there's the letters in the movie industry. I'm not sure what they are, like ASCA and
Yeah.
Well, software developers certainly have certifications. That's a big part of
Oh,
what
yeah.
we do.
Yeah.
Yeah, just not specifically game developers.
Yeah.
Like, could you just like get together in a big group of like
Our 3 schools, we could sit after this
Yeah.
and make up an accreditation program for the game. And then in 5 years,
Make your checks payable directly to me.
Yeah.
make that work.
Well, and truth be told, like, then, for, if anybody's on the tenuring process, then you could be like, well, I established this. Full professorship, please. Again, there are incentives to schools for these things. So as students, you can be like, go do it. Like, you have the power if any of you are students. So please go do it. Same thing with, blogs and writing. Go.
If you want to write game reviews, write game reviews.
I mean, I'll be honest, I got my start in this industry by teaching 3D software and then being in a place where, they're like, well, this guy is a game teacher. And I was like, well, I need to be legit. I need to start reading about games and writing about games. And that made my career. So you can do that.
You've
It's a
already
thing.
taken the first step in
Yeah.
my history, which is I got my start because I started coming to MAGFest and was able to do panels. And I somehow parlay that into a PhD.
Yeah.
So it's all possible.
Yes.
I would also suggest if you read good reviews, share them.
Yeah.
And when you read a review, don't be harsh of the reviewer if they come at it from a very strong perspective.
Yeah.
If you see someone who only writes from a multicultural perspective and how the underclass is represented in a game, don't be hard on that person if that's what they're focusing on. That's their thing. Let them have their thing, and just know that that's not maybe what you care about. I hate seeing reviewers smack down for having a point of view. Point of views are great, but it's a different purpose than should I buy the game.
Polygon's Destiny.
Those are 2 very different reviewers. So let both exist because we need them both.
Yeah.
I want someone writing academic papers about the effects on society of BioShock 3, and I want to know if I should play this game.
Yeah.
Those are 2 different things. And,
Yeah.
any final words?
Thanks everybody for coming out. Come up and see us if you have further questions. I'm here all day, and it's great having you.
Thank you.